Today on Government Matters, a new Army unit with new skill sets for soldiers. Army Chief of Staff General James McConville tells you how the force will build those units. An acquisition revolution at Homeland Security. The department's procurement leader on how she's trying to rewrite the rules for software buying. And the #1 story of the week, a new leader and new oversight for the Pentagon Supply Chain Cyber Certifier. CMMC Board Chair Carlton Johnson on next steps for DoD security. Government Matters starts right now.
From Washington, D.C. and around the world, this is Government Matters with Francis Rose.
Thanks for watching the weekend edition of Government Matters, the only show covering the latest news, trends, and topics that matter to the business of government. I'm your host, Francis Rose. The Army will build at least 2 multi-domain task forces in the Pacific and another one in Europe. Those MDTFs will provide long-range precision fires and intelligence, cyber, electronic warfare, space, and other capabilities. The Army will focus on how to staff those task forces as it stands them up. General James McConville is Chief of Staff of the Army. General McConville, welcome back on the program. Thanks for coming on. You're standing these task forces up at the same time that you're focused on transitioning from what you call an industrial age talent management system in the Army to a digital age talent management system. How are you approaching that transformation in an environment that is as tradition heavy as the Army is, sir?
Well, I think, first of all, we're recognizing the importance of technology and how it's going to affect the future warfighter or competition, if you will. And so what we realize is that we've had an industrial age personnel management system that has worked fine over the last many years. But if we move into the future, we need to move to a 21st century talent management system, which recognizes every soldier as an individual with their knowledge, skills, and behavior. And that way we can manage and incentivize them to have the talents we need. And you talked about the multi-domain task force, which is going to have an intelligence, information operations, cyber, electronic warfare, and space capabilities. And what we recognize in the future, we're going to need soldiers that can do artificial intelligence, that can do data management, that can write software on the battlefield. So we're going to have to manage those soldiers in a special way.
How much of that management do you have the license to be able to do by changing systems internally? How much of that has to come from OSD, the Secretary of Defense, from Congress?
Well, I think we have the authorities to do it right now. We are doing it. What I want to put in place is a system that can manage those soldiers the way we need to manage them. I suggest that right now in the Army, we manage soldiers basically on their military occupational specialty in their ranks. So they're a sergeant of engineers or they're a captain of infantry. And what we need to know is much more about the soldiers' knowledge, skills, behaviors, and even their preferences. What do they want to do? Where do they want to go? And that's the way we think we'll get the best results.
How much of that will come from the individual soldier, and how much of that will come from who that soldier reports to?
Well, it's a little of both. We're putting in place an integrated personnel and pay system that is going to bring all 3 components of the United States Army together on one personnel system. And then the way we manage our troops will be different than we manage right now. We just standing up a software factory for the Army. We're running a major effort called Project Convergence, where we're bringing together all our sensors, our shooters, and tied together with an integrated battle command system and artificial intelligence. And what we realized when we ran our first demonstration of this capability is that we need soldiers that can write software on the battlefield. And so we've reached out. We have a tremendous amount of soldiers that have that talent, that code, that want to write software, and now we're going to bring them in to this capability. And then we need to have a management capability to make sure they're promoted and they're incentivized for their talents.
Last time you were on the program, General, we talked about Project Convergence and how it eventually will integrate into JADC2. What are the implications for that interaction with the other branches, for the joint force, in the way the Army internally evaluates its talent and determines who needs to be where and have what skills in what locations?
Well, first of all, I think it's absolutely critical that all the services come together and integrate into a system which we're actually calling CJADC2, Combined Joint All-Domain Command and Control. We put the C on there because as we take a look at future operations, we believe will always be with our allies and partners. So we need to bring them into the command and control system. And then with the joint force, we're always going to operate as a joint force. And we need soldiers, non-commissioned officers, and officers that understand the importance of the joint force and can operate within a joint force construct.
You mentioned the new talent management system, ATAP, that you're undertaking. Will that eventually become the ultimate manager, the ultimate environment for determining where soldiers go and the skills that you want them to determine? Or will there be other measures of what soldiers can and should be capable of doing?
Yeah, I think you mentioned the Army talent alignment program that we're using right now. We see this as kind of like a 1.0 system. Once we get the integrated personnel and pay system in place and we start to integrate artificial intelligence and some other more efficient data management systems, I think what we're going to see is it's going to be people making decisions based on enabled by the technology that we're going to have in place. And so what will happen in the future, if you're looking for a soldier with a certain skill set, you'll be able to look across the entire Army, regular Army, National Guard, and reserves, and put a feeler out there and say, hey, who wants to be a coder? And then we'll be able to draw from the entire Army. We're doing that right now, but it's really not at the efficiency that we would like to see.
General McConville, thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate it, sir.
Well, thank you, Francis. It's great to be with you.
Up next, a revolution for software buying at the Department of Homeland Security. Straight ahead on Government Matters, a new contract and a new way to look at getting hardware and software. You're watching 7 News. Welcome back. The Department of Homeland Security has a new draft of its FirstSource II solicitation. The agency will use the $10 billion small business contract for IT software and hardware. Soraya Correa is Chief Procurement Officer at the Department of Homeland Security. Soraya, welcome. Great to see you again. What did you and your colleagues at DHS learn from FirstSource II that you're applying to the new edition?
Hey, good morning. Thank you for having me here today. Since FirstSource II was awarded back in 2012, technology has certainly evolved and changed somewhat. So we took into consideration several key factors. First and foremost, cybersecurity. We're obviously going to be including some provisions that impact cybersecurity. We're going to make sure that we take cyber supply chain risk management into consideration as part of our evaluation. We also looked at on-ramping, the ability to continually add sources to the contract to make sure that we stay fresh in terms of the number of companies that we have available, but the types of companies that are providing services and software and hardware under the FirstSource II solicitation. And then streamlining the reporting. Feedback from industry. We obtained a lot of feedback from industry, especially our FirstSource II vendors, as well as those companies that are interested in doing business with the department. And one of the things that we talked quite a bit about was streamlining the reporting requirements, making sure that we streamline not only the reporting post-award, but also even streamlining the proposal submission process. So you can count on that our new solicitation is going to take into consideration many of our procurement innovation lab techniques to streamline the evaluation process, but also making sure that we're only asking for the information that's necessary to conduct a good and solid evaluation.
This solicitation says this, Soraya: DHS understands the FirstSource II pricing approach was extensive and complex and seeks to take a different approach for FirstSource III. What's the different approach that you're going to take in pricing?
It's a great question. So based on the feedback that we received from industry and even from our own personnel internally, what we decided to do was take a more commercial approach to pricing. In other words, looking more at what are the kinds of discounts offered, how the commercial pricing is structured, and stay away from trying to do the pricing at the piece part level. Over.
You talked about on-ramping and the ability for companies to get involved in this, to get on this contract through the life of the contract. Is there an off-ramping issue there too, in case companies, since this is a small business set-aside, become so successful that they don't qualify as small businesses anymore?
Well, I'd hate to say that they become so successful that they don't qualify. Hopefully, they will always qualify. But yes, we are looking at off-ramping so that at any point during the course of the life of the contract, we can off-ramp companies who perhaps are not performing well or who have outgrown the requirements of the solicitation. So that's an extremely important piece because we want to keep the companies fresh and viable. And again, I want to emphasize, FirstSource II, the reason it was so successful and the reason FirstSource I was so successful is because this is 100% small business set aside. And we want to make sure those small business dollars go to the small business companies. Over.
How has software buying changed since FirstSource II? One of the major changes is software as a service, licensing versus buying boxes. How do you approach that here?
So here we created the maximum flexibility so that our components have the ability to order software as a service or buy enterprise licenses or even individual licenses. We wanted to provide maximum flexibility because we do use a variety of methods across the government and especially at the Department of Homeland Security. Another key feature in this procurement is we added another North American Industry Classification Code, or NAICS code. We added the software publishing code, and we did that so that we could better track software, actually manage the reporting and tracking of software. So in other words, instead of just having IT value-added resellers NAICS code, we now have a second NAICS code, which is software publishing. And that's going to give us a great deal more flexibility, and it accounts for many changes that the Small Business Administration has made in its rules.
You mentioned you're incorporating elements of that you've learned from the Procurement Innovation Lab in this solicitation. What will that look like to the vendors who are responding to this?
So it should look a little more streamlined. In other words, the process for bidding on the contracts should be a lot simpler. It should go a lot smoother, faster, a little bit more efficient, a little bit more effective, and far more engaging and informative for the vendors. In other words, our Procurement Innovation Lab techniques have focused on only asking for that information which is necessary, using more of a phased approach to the evaluation of proposals so that we can begin to notify unsuccessful vendors as early as possible in the process and only engage with those vendors that have a likelihood of receiving an award. And most importantly, more engagement with the vendors, making sure that we're communicating on a more recurring basis, not only about the evaluation, but also about the status of the procurement.
Speaking of engagement with vendors, any theme to the comments that you got in the draft solicitation, Soraya?
Sure. So some of the themes, industry was very interested in security requirements that we might impose because obviously everybody's paying attention to the breaches that are happening out there and all the changes that we're undergoing. So very interested in what we were doing in the area of cybersecurity, contract structure, flexibility, and of course, pricing. Companies were very interested in understanding how we were going to evaluate their technical and their price proposals, as well as how we look to structure the contract and manage it going forward.
Regarding security, are you implementing standards like a FedRAMP standard, a CMMC standard, or something that is internal to the department?
A little bit of both, let me say it that way. We are still looking at the comments that we received from industry and finalizing, and so I don't want to get out ahead of our Chief Information Officer because they have to review the solicitation. But the bottom line is we're incorporating a little bit of both. We want to make sure we protect the interests of the department, but we also protect the companies that are out there working with us.
30 seconds, Soraya. What's the timeline for seeing this on the street?
Our target right now is to issue the solicitation on or about April 20th. We're very excited to get the solicitation out. We're in the final stages of review, and we do expect to hold another industry conference to talk about the solicitation in its final form, probably by the end of April, early May at the latest.
Soraya Correa, thank you very much. Great to have you on the program.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Up next, the #1 story of the week, the Defense Department taking another look at the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification. Straight ahead on Government Matters, the review underway and the changes coming to the program. You're watching 7 News. And now the #1 story of the week. The Chief Information Officer of the Air Force, Lauren Nausenberger, expressed some reservations this week about the Defense Department's big bet on securing its supply chain. Those comments follow a big hire by the board that oversees that big bet and a review from the top of the department. Carlton Johnson is chairman of the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Accreditation Body. Carlton, welcome back. A lot to cover. Let's start with that Industry Advisory Council that CMMC has established. What's the goal of that council, and what's the feedback that you're looking for, Carlton?
Excellent, and thank you for having me back. In short, we've always talked about communicating and educating and keeping the industry informed, and just as important, letting them have a voice. That's exactly what the IAC is about. We're bringing the best and brightest together to talk not only about the implementation of CMMC, but to communicate any issues, concerns, and even look at opportunities to improve it over time and space. So we want the customer to have a direct interface with us and then work together with the government to make it even better.
How will your IAC go about interacting with industry to get that feedback and put it into something that's useful for you and your colleagues on the board to be able to interpret and make changes based on?
Excellent question. And as we continue to evolve this, the industry is really going to have the lift on how that works. We want to make sure that whatever we do, there's value addedness from the industry perspective. And so the initial conversation will be, what are the commitments, what are the goals and objectives that we're going to have as an industry team? And then together working with them to navigate that with our treasurer, YG Chand, who's going to facilitate that, to help them get that from ideas and thoughts and concepts to actual deliverables that they will execute over time and space.
One of the stakeholders, I imagine, in the work that IAC does is your new hire that I mentioned a moment ago, Matt Travis. Great background at CISA, at the Department of Homeland Security. What advantage do you think that gives him walking into this job to work with you and your colleagues?
I have to tell you, I'm extremely excited to have Matt Travis on board. His bona fides far exceed him. The gravitas that he's bringing to this conversation is second to none. So he was absolutely the right hire to bring in to do this. And specifically to what you talked about, his extensive leadership in the system environment, his experience with government, his experience with industry, all that's going to come together to help operationalize and professionalize what we're doing with CMMC. And with the IAC, he's going to be able to get that additional insight from industry so that he can be more effective in this job. I'm very excited to have him on board.
FedScoop report about his hiring says this: Travis will lead day-to-day operations at the AB, a job that's largely been filled by the AB's board of directors. That's you and your team in the nearly 15 months since it was incorporated. What will his hiring allow you and your colleagues to step back from on the board, and what will you continue to do, the board that is, that you've been doing all along?
And again, another great question. And this is exactly what we have planned to do from day one. The board came together as a team of professional volunteers. And volunteer, I should say, is not a pay grade. Volunteerism is a pay grade versus a skill level. And these people have done a lot of volunteerism to get this up and running. That said, that's not sustainable over long term. Bringing Matt and his team on board does exactly that, allows us to sustain operations, to scale up operations so that we can continue to deploy CMMC. And then the board of directors transforms from a board of director doers to a board that governs. And we provide that strategic oversight, guidance, and where necessary support to Matt so he can deploy CMMC and meet not only the obligations of the contract, but more importantly, help defend the defense industrial base.
The board, and no doubt Mr. Travis, will be interacting greatly with Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathleen Hicks and her team as she undertakes the review that I alluded to at the beginning of our conversation, Carlton. What's your sense of what that review will encompass? Do you know so far what that review will encompass, and what do you want and hope to demonstrate to the team that represents Secretary Hicks in that review?
And I think you'll respect my answer here, because that's a government action. I defer a lot of those to the government. What I will say from the AB perspective is, as always, we're going to remain transparent. Everything that we do is open and available to the government to understand what we're doing and to help make it better. So anything that we can do to support the effort to communicate and educate and then follow through with the deliverables of the contract, but also to inform the administration and team of what we're doing and how we can make it better. Extremely open to anything that can help us do things at the next level of excellence.
We have a little bit more than a minute left, Carlton. What's your timeline look like? What's the impact on that timeline of any of the things that we've talked about? The review from the Deputy Secretary's office, the hiring of Matt Travis, and so on. Are you accelerating the timeline that you envisioned the last time you were on the program? Are you staying the course? What does that look like?
As of today, I am staying the course. I say that because everything we've been doing to date has been in line with the timelines we've been given and work with the DoD. That said, if that needs to accelerate, we're prepared to do what we need to do to accelerate. The main thing is that we want to make sure we stay in line with the commitments that we promise, we deliver on what we promise, and we, at the end of the day, we meet the obligations of the contract. That requires a ability to be agile, but also ongoing conversation, and we're staying in lockstep with the government with those conversations.
Carlton Johnson, thanks very much for joining me today. It's great to have you back on the program.
Thank you.
Don't forget, if you miss an episode of Government Matters, it's on our website, govmatters.tv, and you can get a preview of every show when you sign up for our daily program guide. To get it, you just text GovMatters to 58671. I'm back in 2 minutes. That's the latest from Washington. Join me weeknights at 8 and 11 on WJLA 24/7 News, and next Sunday morning at 10:30 on 7 News to stay plugged in on issues that matter to the business of government. Thanks for watching. I'm Francis Rose.